Folks, I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. Good to see everybody here. What a great turnout. Before we start talking about our program and introducing our program, let's just do a quick run around the room and say who we are. I will demonstrate how we can do that most efficiently by saying, hi, everybody. I'm Chris Blue, Chapel Hill Town Manager. Let's go over to Cheryl.
Shiroki, Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools.
Caroline Mazinga, the UNC Highway Safety Research Center.
Lance Norris, Chapel Hill Public Works Department.
To Cornwall Parks and Recreation, Chapel Hill.
I'm Roger Henderson, Town's Traffic Engineer.
I'm Chuck Edwards, NCDOT.
Trevor McCoskey, NCDOT.
Lauren Clark, Deputy Town Manager of Chapel Hill.
Lisa Leahy, Police Chief at the town. Isabel Malatich, Vision Zero intern.
Serena Stakes, Chief Planning Assistant.
Camille Berry, Chapel Hill Town Council.
Fire Chief for the town.
Amy Brown, Chief of Staff for the Mayor.
Amy Ryan, Chapel Hill Mayor Pro Tem.
Stacey Graves, Deputy Fire Chief.
Todd Harris, Chapel Hill Police.
Brittany Wydell, Chapel Hill Plan Director. Mary Jane Nerdlinger, Deputy Town Manager.
Susan Brown, Director of Communications for Town of Chapel Hill.
Ben Burlsheimer, Mobility and Greenways Planner.
Alex Carrasquillo, Public Information Officer, Town of Chapel Hill. I'm also going to take pictures.
Hi, everybody. Aaron Bockenheimer with UNC Chapel Hill.
Theo Noller, Town Council, Chapel Hill.
Elizabeth Sharp, Town Council. Jess Anderson, Mayor.
Leah Sham, Vision Zero Network.
Bergen Watterson, Mobility and Greenways Manager. School Coordinator.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And we did that so well, just kind of illustrates what a great team we are, how well we all work together, and what a cool turnout. I mean, just great practitioners all committed to making our community as safe as we possibly can. And we are so fortunate to have Leah Sham here today from the Vision Zero Network to help facilitate our really important conversation. So before we get started on the program, I do want to just acknowledge that I think we are fully staffed in our Office of Mobility and Greenways, also known as Very nice. Under Bergen's leadership, of course, and you already heard from Allison West, our Safe Routes to School coordinator. Our Kurt Stolka will be starting as our full-time Vision Zero coordinator on April 15th, so just a couple weeks. Office rounded out by Ben Berlsheimer, our Mobility and Greenways planner, and you heard from our interns, Serena and Isabel. This is a really important conversation, and we're so pleased to see all of you here, folks who have a stake in making sure our community is as safe as it can be, folks who can help pull the levers to ensure that we are continuing to work toward that council goal of no deaths or serious injuries on our roadways by 2031. That seems like a lofty goal, and it is an achievable goal. And we got to keep remembering that is an achievable goal. We can get to that. We've got to commit to it. We've got to continue to partner, collaborate, put things in motion that create an environment where we can realize that goal. It's a worthwhile endeavor, and one that I believe we will meet. And just thinking about the people in this room, these are folks who can make that happen. There's a lot of power in this room. So thank you all so much for being here. As we listen and learn from Leah today, I encourage you to continue to think about ways we can collaborate and partner and innovate, as I think we are well on our way to doing, and as our history together has demonstrated, we do so very well. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Bergen.
I am here to happily introduce Leah Sham, who is the founder and director of the Vision Zero Network, which you'll all learn about more in a few minutes. She was a German Marshall Fund Fellow and researched Vision Zero strategies in Sweden, Germany, and the Netherlands. Prior to that, she was the executive director of the 10,000-member San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. She served as a policymaker on the boards of directors of the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency and the Golden Gate Bridge District. Leah's here because several of us were at the AAA Safe Mobility Conference for the last 2 days, which was hosted at the Friday Center in conjunction with the Highway Safety Research Center. So we spent the last 2 days with a national group of practitioners, researchers, and other national transportation leaders. So we're kind of carrying that momentum forward and took advantage of Leah being in town to spend the day with us today. So I think this is going to be a great conversation.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. I'm super glad to be here. My name is Leah Shaham, and I'm with the Vision Zero Network. And before I get into what that is and do a little overview of what I want to share today and what I want to ask you about, I just want to say we were at, as Bergen mentioned, this 2-day summit. Really impressive crowd. I'm looking at you, Caroline, because you organized, I know your team, I should say, AAA Foundation and the UNC team brought people from all over the country. Amazing folks. I mean, a lot of national leaders. I couldn't believe you got so many folks in the room. A lot of people from cities, counties, states, all sorts of folks. We talked about a lot of things. Some of the things we're going to talk about here, like Vision Zero, the goal of safety for everyone, safe mobility for everyone. We talked a lot about health equity. We talked a lot about how do we make change to get there. And I think the thing that is most challenging in communities is not the technical part. You have really smart engineers. I'm looking at some of you guys. I know you have very smart and ladies, really smart engineers and planners who know how to do things. The toughest part is how do you make the change? It is a really big shift on the ground to think differently about our streets, about our public spaces, about the policies that influence this. And I just want to say everybody in that room yesterday would be really jealous of what you've got going here. I mean that truly. Looking around, what I heard in one-on-one conversations was, everybody says they want to do these things, but we don't really have a team, on board to do it. We don't have the support. We don't have the backing. That's the hardest part. So I just want to say you guys are light years ahead because I've been already, learning a lot from your team about the staff you have in place, the leadership you have in place with your city manager, your mayor, your council support. To have 5 city council members here, it sounds like, right? 5 already is so impressive. And my gosh, the police chief and fire folks and folks from the state, you guys have the basics here. So I just want to say thank you. You're starting in that awesome place that everybody in that room yesterday would be really envious of. So. Are you going to move for me? Great. Okay. Thank you. So actually, maybe I'll do a quick who I am. Who the heck am I? My name is Leah, and I live out in California, but I went to school in the area. I'm not going to mention where. Definitely not going to mention it this week. And I am flying home tomorrow to be in safe ground and not around here tomorrow. And I'll just leave that at that. But good luck tonight. So I started a nonprofit called Vision Zero Network. And our goal, we are national. I live in California, but our goal is national. And the goal is 0 traffic deaths or severe injuries among all road users. That's everyone. I just want to really emphasize. I think sometimes folks get confused. It's got a lot of attention around pedestrian and bicycling safety for obvious reasons. And I'll talk about that in a second with this graph. But it is everyone. And that's one of the things that drew me to it. I'll just share a quick background. I fell into this work and I was a bicycling advocate for bike lanes and such in San Francisco for about 15 years. Not a super hardcore bike rider by any means, but I really saw it as a means to an end of how to make the city calmer, safer, more environmentally friendly, more healthy. Just thought, gosh, it's a small city, density wise. We need less car traffic and more people walking and biking and taking transit. So that's how I got into it. And after about 15 years, we had a lot of success in the city with getting more people biking and fewer crashes and injuries. But we were just talking about the biking sector, really, to be honest. And I saw the overflow. I saw the connections. And I want to share what really flipped the switch for me is, gosh, after doing it for about 12 or so years, I'll never forget. It was New Year's Day. I want to say 2013. Yeah, New Year's Day 2013. And I read the news that the night before, on New Year's Eve, a woman walking with her child, who I think was about 5 years old, walking with her child on New Year's Eve in the early evening on Polk Street. It's called Polk Street in busy area, the worst traffic, worst crashes in the city, lower income area, highest number of kids, highest racial diversity, lowest income in the area, most number of deaths on the roads. These folks were hit and killed by a driver on New Year's Eve. And got a lot of attention, understandably. It was tragic, tragic, tragic. But I remember hearing that and coming back into the office on, say, January 3rd or 4th and just really being despondent. Like, we've been doing this work. We've been making progress. More people were biking. More bike lanes were everywhere. We were getting all this attention for these. Like, this is not enough. We're asking the wrong questions. I don't mean wrong. It was good work, but we're not actually getting at the need, which is literally, and I'll share how I came up with this, and I promise I will get to the slides, but I was walking to lunch really despondent, walking around, and I ran into the head of our SF environment department. And he happened to be somebody I knew. He was a member of the Bicycle Coalition. And he looked at me and said, God, that was an awful tragedy. A few days ago, how terrible. You guys must feel really like deflated right now. And I should mention, we've been working for 10 years on that street with no change. 10 years. Everybody agreed it needed to change. They needed traffic calming. They needed speeds lowered. But, everybody was bickering about how, and nothing changed. And this little boy and his mom got killed. And there were other deaths there too, but this one really got our attention. And this SF environment department turned to me. The guy said, isn't it crazy that we have a zero waste policy in San Francisco, but we don't have a zero traffic deaths policy? And it literally hit me right then. And we did. We have a zero waste policy. They're not there yet, but that's a goal, right? It's a very audacious goal. I don't know that they will literally get to zero waste, but the city has set a zero waste goal. And I know they've made huge progress because they've set a zero waste goal. And all these agencies work together and policies have changed and things have changed. And it hit me. Why don't we have a zero traffic deaths goal? And I'd been reading about Vision Zero from Sweden and all these other places. And we know it was starting to get attention in New York. New York hadn't committed yet. But I'm really proud to say we brought it to our mayor. Our mayor embraced it. We brought it to our transportation department and our police chief, and everybody was on board. We looked and said, look at this idea of Vision Zero. We have to set this goal if we're going to do things differently, if we're going to shake off this, what is basically complacency, not ill will. Nobody has intent, of course, for people to die on the roads, but we've got to shake off the complacency and do things differently. It was a way longer intro, but I just realized I wanted to share kind of what brought me to this and what clicked for me, that we were, as hard as I was working and as hard as these advocates were working and making change for biking, we were still playing in the margins, important margins, really important margins, but we were not asking like the fundamental questions about what we need to be doing. So that's why I'm here today, and that's why you guys, what I'm going to cover is a little bit of like, why are we talking about this? Why is there a AAA summit for 2 days, down the road? Why do you all have a Vision Zero policy, and what does that mean? So why? And then I'm going to talk about what's happening around the country and what we're seeing, especially I want to say at the federal level, and I want to highlight federal opportunities for policy change and new funding. And I know this is the part where everybody's eyes light up. It's like new funding. I'm not just saying that. There is really new funding. Deadlines, April, May, and July. We will talk about that. Really timely. And then next year too, but brand new funding that you guys can get. And then I want to talk about, or lead into, ask you guys kind of what's next for Chapel Hill. So starting with why are we here? I won't dwell on this because I think people probably know the tragedy of, we have more than 40,000 traffic deaths in the US. Every single day, an estimated 115 people die while driving, walking, or biking, or using a scooter, or in a wheelchair, 115. You see how much higher the people walking and biking, and I don't need to explain to you why. These are national numbers, of course, but people walking and biking obviously are much more at risk. And if you're interested, this is a great New York Times article from about a year ago. This is an exceptionally American problem. This is not just a human condition. We are not the only, we almost are the only ones. As the Centers for Disease Control did a study, looked at 27 what they call high-income nations, so similar nations, 27. For traffic deaths, we rank last. The U.S. ranks last. Next slide. This is not all of them. 28. We rank the worst. So it kind of should be on the bottom there. And you look for a second, go, well, we're not Sweden. We're not Norway. We're never going to be Sweden. We're never going to be Norway. They are small, compact, maybe more homogeneous, you could say. I don't know. True, they are very different. Their traffic death rates were like ours in the 1970s. That recently, so probably in most of our lifetimes. In the 1970s, those countries on the bottom had about the same. We were all more at the 10, 11. And this is by per 100,000, by the way. I should be clear about that. So in the US, it's a little higher now. US, it's about 11 to 12 traffic deaths per 100,000 population. So these are rates. You look at countries that are very, very big, that have land use like us, similar, you're right, Canada, Australia, much, much less, half our traffic death rate. But again, I want to really emphasize this. This is not just that folks in Sweden are made differently, that they're more polite or such, that they're more careful. They had the same traffic death rates we did, and they've done work to make change, and they have changed. So I'm starting with the bad news of where we're at, but I'm going to move into the good news of where we're going. Next slide, please. I want to give some shout outs. I also want to give a little, 3 days ago, I was in DC and got to be in the room with Secretary Pete as he was making an announcement about something. So I was very, very excited because I think he is doing, and his team is doing an amazing job of starting to change the paradigm by starting to change the conversation. We now in the US have, for the first time ever, the goal of 0 traffic deaths nationally. The year is 2050. I know that is a long way off, but still really ambitious, right? We now have, for the first time ever, a national roadway safety strategy. Is anyone else surprised that we did not have a national roadway safety strategy? I won't make you raise your hand, but I was shocked. I mean, let me say, not to diss on U.S. Department of Transportation, there's lots of safety work they've been doing, but there's never been a actual national strategy saying, okay, what's the role of enforcement? What's the role of speed management? How are we setting speeds? What's the role of the design? This is the first. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It really does a great job. And I really appreciate, again, I'm giving shout outs because to have this kind of leadership saying 0 is our goal, 0 is the only acceptable number, is a big deal. It's a big deal. Next slide. And again, it's a big deal because it's urgent. This is, you know, I sometimes get bummed out that I show so many numbers and stats and quotes and we talk about policy. These are folks' lives. 115 people around the country will die today. That's why we're doing this. Next slide. And I wanted to highlight this one because part of what the U.S. Department of Transportation, there were some great folks there yesterday at this conference or the last 2 days, talking a lot about this safe system approach. So you guys get it. The goal of Vision Zero is 0 traffic deaths or severe injuries among all road users. Again, very bold, very audacious, right? And if you ask, I'd love to hear her, the Deputy Secretary of the US DOT, Polly Trottenberg, who ran the New York City Department of Transportation, she was once asked, I'm sure many times, but was quoted once as being asked, you know, isn't that insane to do 0? Isn't that overly ambitious? Isn't that crazy? Unachievable. And she, you know, she answered beautiful. I'm not going to quote her exactly, but she answered beautifully of like, you know what? When we set the goal there, we shift the thinking and we shift the actions. If we together are committing to this audacious goal, it may not mean we literally get to 0, but it's going to mean along the way we're asking different questions. So back to this idea of, you know, how do we make it a little safer? How do we make it a little less awful? Those are a set of questions. Or you could ask, how do we literally design, set policies, you know, get the word out to folks around the goal of safe mobility for everyone? If that's our goal, we're going to ask that question and we're going to work towards that. So what they've done at USDOT, and this is really exciting, I know you're thinking about this a lot in your work here, is really think about the different components. I won't go into all this, you get it, right? Of course, everybody has these roles of you know, first responders, a huge piece, safe speed, safe roads, all these important pieces. I pulled this quote out from that National Roadway Safety Strategy because I think it's really symbolic, but also specifically helpful of what could look different, right? Because we can have all the charts and diagrams and goals. Let me say, I'm the first one to say, you know, having a goal is one thing, or having a tagline, you know, it's kind of got a sexy name, Vision Zero, great. What we need to be doing underneath it is what matters now. So I really appreciate this quote and commitment in the strategy that says the department believes it's important to prioritize safety and moving individuals at safe speeds above, focusing exclusively on the throughput of motor vehicles. That is something that isn't going to happen until it's happening here, right, on the ground. Those are decisions made at state departments of transportation, at local, the MPOs, I'm sure, have roles in these things too. But this is the message we're getting from the feds, and this is what they're funding. Next slide. And I want to talk about funding. So teaser here, this really is exciting. This is not just it happens to be something I'm going to mention. This is brand new money. It's part of the big transportation infrastructure bill. Just getting going. It's in round 2, I think. So Safe Streets and Roads for All. Check it out online. I know we're meeting with your staff today to talk about this. As of today, you see how much money has gone out. 70% of the population, so not land-wise, but people-wise population, has gotten grants. I think the MPO here in the area has gotten a planning grant, which is really exciting, and I'm sure you'll be part of that. I want to help you all get a grant, for real. Let's talk more about that. A quick overview of what this is, because I know not everyone here needs to go and apply for the grant, but to tell you a bit about it, it's specifically focused on using that safe system approach I just mentioned, or those different areas. It highlights walking and biking safety because those folks are being hit and killed at disproportionately high numbers. It emphasizes health equity, so racial income equity, really looking at the communities that have been really underserved in terms of street design and policies over time. So the things that are really going to get looked at particularly are those that are helping, again, walking and biking, safety, but all road users, and particularly in communities of concern. And there's planning and there's implementation. For the planning, you can do demonstration projects. It's much easier to get the planning and demonstration. Those demonstration projects, I'm just going to name a few things other cities are doing, if you want to borrow these ideas. Pilot traffic calming projects. Those pilots could go in for a year or two, and if they're working great, they can stay in, or they get built upon, or maybe they get changed if they need to be changed. If they don't work, they can get taken out. But on the ground pilots for that. Lowering speed limits. That can be done as a pilot or demonstration. You've obviously got to gather data from that and find out, did it do what we wanted it to do? One City, Baltimore, is starting a Ciclovia or open streets program where once a month on Sundays, they will open the streets to people walking, biking, scootering, no cars allowed on what is going to be a future green belt. Actually, this might be a great one for you guys, Greenway or green belt in their city. They're doing that as part of this because it's also going to be an outreach opportunity to talk to people literally on the street. So instead of making them come to a city hall meeting at 2 p.m., no offense, city councilors, but 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, they're going to meet people on a Sunday out in the street where they live and talk about a safety project or improvements in the neighborhood. They're getting funded through Safe Streets and Roads for All for this. So a lot of opportunity. Next slide. And there's also a lot of opportunity beyond the funding, but with the funding. This is a map of all the Vision Zero cities that we right now recognize. We need to get you guys on the map. We need to update it. But just a couple of them. I just want to pause and say, Vision Zero has now been going in the U.S. since about 2014, so about 10 years, and it's grown a lot. This is something that a local community commits to, right? Even though there are now funding programs and all sorts of words used around it. It's exciting, but in the end, it's a local commitment. You need to have your commitment from the mayor, city council, agency-wide. We can talk more about that, but you'll see I just did a couple examples. Here's 4 of the many that have developed Vision Zero action plans and policies. You can get money from elsewhere. You can work with partners, of course you need to, but in the end, it's on the ground work. Next slide. Go ahead and do the next 2. I did kind of a weird little dramatic pause here. I can't emphasize this enough. Vision Zero is not a slogan. It's not a tagline. It's not a program. It's not just something to put on your signs or put on your grant proposals or put on the top of a old plan wanting to be a new plan. I just want to, and not that you guys are doing that. It's sometimes I think kind of thought of like, great, we're going to take that language and use it. It is not that. It is a fundamental shift, a real shift in how we're doing business. And it's going to take time to do. It's not the kind of thing where once you develop a plan, you're doing it, just to be honest. It's going to take time and energy. And it is a paradigm shift. So I want to talk about what examples of those changes are and really commend you guys for the steps you're already taking. And talk a little bit again about how some of these policies and funding are encouraging that. They can't force anybody to do anything, but these federal policies and funding are encouraging. Next slide. So kind of real basics. this is a very simplified version, but kind of a fun way, I think, to say what is the difference when I say it's a shift. When excuse me, we talk about changing from the traditional approach to Vision Zero, and I'm going to call it Vision Zero / the safe system approach. Vision Zero is the goal. People get that, right? Zero traffic deaths or severe injuries among all people. How we get there is the safe system approach, which is, more of the how. So kind of the how and what on the right. I won't go through all these, but I just want to highlight a few. This is not to knock the traditional approach by any means. We've been doing things a long time because we care about safety, because we care about moving people, we care about communities. We've also learned a lot about what works better than some things better than other things. We also, frankly, have tools and data that are helping us understand that better. I won't get into all that too much, but it's a little less gut feeling and anecdotal and a lot more data-driven these days. And again, the planners, engineers, policymakers, they have these tools and know-how to do these things. What we're needing to catch up on, and I'll talk about that, frankly, is more political will and public support to make the change. But some of these changes, so the idea of traffic deaths are inevitable. Again, people weren't just walking around going, traffic deaths are inevitable. We're not going to do a thing. Let's throw our hands up. No, not that. But we were not setting zero goals. And not to put anybody on the spot, but I'm guessing North Carolina's state highway safety plan, because I know this, because no state highway safety plan in the country, has in past set literally the goal of zero. Not a knock. This is all new. But what we're seeing is because every state has to have a state highway safety plan, right? And they have to set goals, and it's important to set goals. How are we going to hopefully reduce traffic deaths? And every state has maybe shown a little bit of a reduction, or sometimes even a little bit of an increase, because that's what they're projecting. And that's just being honest, what they know, right? What this is partly doing is saying that may be what happens in 3 years or 5 years, but we're going to set a different goal and now do everything we can differently, or what we need to do differently. And we're going to talk about that. But setting that goal sends a message to your staff. It sends a message about funding priorities. It sends a message about decision-making and policy challenges, because none of this is easy. If it were easy, we've all done it. So setting that goal is a shift, and you have done that. And talk kind of about number 2 and number 4, but the idea of perfecting human behavior versus integrating human behavior. This was a really big shift for me. You mentioned I was really lucky. I got this fellowship to go study in Sweden and a couple countries, and this was the big change to me. Vision Zero started in Sweden. I was like, what? How did you guys do this? What is this? It started, this concept of zero deaths started amongst other industries, like people working in a factory, people working, actually the airline industry is a great example, but people working in nuclear reactors, dangerous places where the policy and everybody understood it was, we want our workers, everybody in this, say, car manufacturing plant, safety is our number 1 priority for everyone working in this facility. And they had this idea about 30 years ago, wait a minute, why don't we take that ethos? It sounds really basic, right? But let's take that ethos to, those are systems in a way. They're smaller, they're more constrained, obviously. But let's take that ethos to our transportation system. Much harder, right? But it's an approach, it's a philosophy. So part of that, and this is the shift part of that is recognizing people will always make mistakes. Always. I mean, not every day, always. People will make mistakes. It's inevitable. Most of us, most of the time, do the safe and right thing. But sometimes you honestly, the sun is in your eyes and you can't see for a second, right? So it's an honest mistake and something happens. You're driving too fast. Some people drive drunk, not a good choice, but right? We are not going to change human behavior. We're going to do our best to educate, enforcement helps. But even with technology coming, there's still going to be, we all know, times the technology doesn't work perfectly. So if we start from that basis, this really is what clicked for me of people are going to make mistakes. How do we now design our systems? And our systems in this scenario are the roads and the policies like speed limits and the vehicles. I know you don't control that, but the vehicles themselves, the options people have, et cetera, and the culture, we'll talk about that. But how do we make these things safe so that when someone does make a mistake, and they will, they might break their leg, they might have a fender bender, which is really unfortunate. We don't want that. But wow, if that was our worst scenario, people were not dying and having life debilitating, injuries, we can survive. So Vision Zero is not zero crashes. I want to really emphasize that. It's zero deaths or injuries. So crashes will happen. In fact, the engineers and planners of the room know, when you add a roundabout or a traffic circle instead of a stop sign, there may be more crashes, but they're really low level non-injury crashes, and there's fewer deaths and injuries they find with traffic circles versus lights or stop signs. So that's just one example where it's not the exact same thing. And part of that has to do with the individual responsibility systems approach. So related to that too, for a long time, and again, this is not to look back and say, oh, we did it wrong, but it's evolving. Part of that was really, really counting on every one of us. Like, oh, we're going to really educate people. We're really going to make sure the kids know how to cross the road, street safely, which absolutely we should be doing. We're going to make sure that 16-year-old knows how to drive. We're going to make sure that that kid wears their helmet when they're biking. These are all really important things about individual responsibility and be as safe as you can and don't drive drunk and all these things. But again, if people sometimes make mistakes, then we're back to what are we going to do about it? So it is incumbent upon, I would say, you all in the room and your partners to build the systems, design the systems, operate the systems in a way where those inevitable mistakes do not end up in deaths. And an example of that, just to be really clear, is how we set speed limits. And we'll talk about that, right? It's not the only thing, but when speed limits are lower and the road is designed a certain way, there will still be crashes. There will be fewer deaths and less severe injuries. Next slide. So part of this is really thinking about where are we putting our energy, and we borrow this from the health world. If there's any health folks, it's called this spectrum of prevention. Yeah, spectrum of prevention. So these are all important areas. So kind of that area I was just talking about, like teaching the kids to cross the road safely and don't drive drunk. That still needs to happen. So there's this education piece needs to happen. We've been counting on that a little too much, so we've been depending on it. What we need to be doing more is upstream policies and legislation and acknowledging where we frankly haven't changed enough. So that's what we'll talk about today. Next slide. And kind of where everybody fits in. I covered this, but if individual road users are following the rules, great. Most of the time they are, but sometimes they don't. Then how are we making sure that the systems, places they're in, again, not zero crashes, but the crashes are survivable. Next slide. And really thinking a little bit about how this kind of evolves. And this is what the US DOT is helping us think about. We still need all these E's. We still need our engineers, our educators, our enforcement folks, but really thinking about how these things intersect way more than we have given them credit. And I really appreciate you guys told me a story. I hope it's okay to say, but that I think that your police department helps kind of give information of what they're seeing on the street in terms of, not just kind of where you guys are giving tickets or et cetera, or warning people, but where you might see room for improvement around street design or issues with things that are not enforcement related, but might be design or policy related. And I just want to say that's a great example. So how are we kind of integrating collaboration there? Next slide. Actually, go ahead. Next slide. I'm going a little slow. So can anybody do this goal of zero? Really happy to find out Hoboken, New Jersey, which has had zero traffic deaths for 7 years, getting a lot of attention lately, is about the exact same size as you guys, both around 60,000 population. Is that right? So I think that was just perfect. I was like, wow. Usually it's like way bigger, way smaller. 7 years. Next slide. I know you guys can't read all this, but I wanted to kind of just share, and I'm happy to share these after. But this is just one example. Won't get into nitty gritty because I'm not a planner or engineer, and I'm not going to talk that too much. But they did lots of things around street design. They lowered speed limits, et cetera, all the things that the planners and engineers know work. But I'm going to not tell you what they did. I'm going to tell you how and where they did it. Because when you ask the Hoboken folks, and I'll share some articles you guys can share afterwards, when you ask the city manager, when you ask the mayor, they're both quoted in these articles, when you ask the chief traffic engineer, when they say, what'd you do? They name these things that are very well-known things. They lowered, and I'll name a couple, they lowered speed limits citywide. Again, 60,000 people, about the same size as you guys, population at least, maybe smaller density. But they lowered speed limits from 25 to 20 miles per hour citywide. They daylighted intersections at a lot of places. Are folks familiar with daylighting? Kind of the idea of at the intersection where it's a busy intersection, and especially if there's people walking there, a lot of walking, you remove the parking spaces at the intersection so there's more visibility. and you can actually see someone coming, other drivers too. So these sorts of things, they narrowed travel lanes. That's kind of what this is showing. Still 2 lanes. On the top is the previous or before, but they narrowed the travel lanes, added bike lanes, built out better crosswalk, obviously, and such. But even those narrow travel lanes, that reduces speeds, that reduces crashes, that reduces injuries. So they did these things, but they didn't just do them on, what is this called? I think it's Washington Street. Yeah, they didn't just do it on Washington Street. They're doing it citywide, really fast. Really fast. Like in 2 years, they daylighted not all, but most of their intersections. Their first year, of Vision Zero, they lowered their speed limits citywide, not on one problem street, citywide from 25 to 20. They did things holistically to scale system-wide. They did things that everything on here is Federal Highway Administration approved, by the way. The feds think these are all good things. I know you still got to, jump through hoops and stuff to do things, but nothing they did was like outlandish. They did the things bigger, more holistically, and really scaled it up. That's what, and what that did was slow people down driving. So there was nowhere that was off limits to cars, but they slowed people down. They had 0 traffic deaths in 7 years. Next slide. And just a couple other places. I won't go into too much, but Fremont, California, suburban area, about 200,000 people. You'll see their traffic deaths going down. New York City gets a lot of credit in their first 5 years of Vision Zero, so that 2014 to 5 years. They cut traffic deaths by 30%. 30%. Overall, their traffic deaths are back up a little bit, but they're still significantly down from 10 years ago. And their pedestrian deaths are at their lowest on recorded history. So since New York's been recording traffic deaths, pedestrian deaths are at the lowest number. And Montgomery County has done a great job, 13% lower. Next slide. And there's a lot to read too. Don't pay too much attention. This is a little map from New York City. One of the things they're doing right, and that they credit that 30% traffic death drop to, again, 30% in New York, 30% in New York City. Like, that still blows my mind when I say it. The things they credit it to are 3 things. One, they lowered speed limits citywide from 30 to 25. It took them like a year to do that. They had to go to the state. They had to go to Albany and legislate and do that. But they did that citywide in a year. They added a lot more signage. By the way, they know only changing speed limits is not the only answer. That's not all they did. But they started there and they sent the message, hey, this is important to us. We know speed matters. They added speed safety cameras around schools. I won't cite the numbers, but that program grew, and they're now seeing about 50% reduction in traffic crashes where those cameras are. And the third thing, the thing that this mentions, obviously it's a big city. Did they go out and change all the streets? Are they anywhere near Hoboken in terms of like scale? Of course not, right? I mean, Hoboken's 60,000, New York is whatever million it is. But what they did was, and I think this is probably my favorite example for how to do the scale. They went out and they said, what kind of crashes are people, particularly pedestrians, because they were having a high pedestrian death rate, what kind of crashes are people being injured, seriously injured and killed in the most? So yes, where? They did look at where. It's very important to have your map of where and focus on that list. But instead of just going project by project every few years, they took a systemic approach. They looked at all these severe injuries and deaths and said, what are commonalities? And one of the biggest commonalities they saw was people driving, taking a left turn. Won't get too specific here, but a left turn on certain kinds of streets, multi-lane streets, two-way multi-lane streets, where there also was a good amount of pedestrian crossings and such. So busy areas. I can send you the study if you're interested. They did a great job in analyzing this. So they said, okay, we've had a lot of deaths and injuries here. Instead of just going and saying, let's go fix those, I'm going to make it up, 22 intersections where that scenario happened, we are going to address those 22. We're going to change those 22 intersections because that's a problem. There's another 150 that have that same design that no one's died at that we know, but it's only a matter of time if it has this design, and that's a problem. So what a different way of thinking. And they're about, as I understand, I mean, it's more than 150. It's several hundred places. And they're about halfway through that in the first 5 years of doing it, as I understand. There's a whole report about it. Now, what did they do at every place? It was different. In some places, they retimed the lights. In some places, they built a pedestrian median islands. You can really tell I'm not a planner or engineer because I don't know these terms. In some places, it was so severe they restricted left turn movements by the cars. So in some places, it was, a bigger change, restricting a left turn. In some places, it was much smaller. It was a light timing thing or a visibility thing or a crosswalk change. They're doing it at every single intersection that has that problem. Next slide. And Jersey City, I wanted to mention, they've been, I think, 4 years now, 4 years of zero traffic deaths. But I really appreciated this quote. This is from, Jersey City. The traffic crashes are not inevitable accidents. And I'll just say, I didn't use my slide of crash, not accident. That's something you'll hear me say a lot of, if we can shift us and our colleagues and folks to say, hey, these are crashes. They're not necessarily accidents. And I know that term accident's been out there a long time. We've all used it, forever since growing up. But to think that it almost gets in our psyche of they're inevitable. It's an accident. A meteor flew out of the sky and this thing happened and no one could have known it. And in reality, when you go look at the numbers, you do know. I mean, that New York City map shows you what could change. Lowering speed limits. And again, is it definitely going to be zero? I don't know if there's any media in the room. I'm not saying, setting the goal of zero does not mean you will definitely get to zero. But doing things differently does translate to seeing different results. So I really appreciate what they really looked at here in Jersey City. How are we really thinking about the factors that lead to these severe injuries and deaths, and really then system-wide making changes? Next slide. And they have a really good plan. If you're looking for a good model, Jersey City's actual plan, their actual Vision Zero plan is really good. So I'm going to focus on just these 4 areas and already touched on of like what works the most. Because you could say, we could do all the things. That's been part of our problem is like we do all the things, right? Like, and we do need the things, but we can't just do all the things scattershot. Some things are more important than others, and some things are harder to change, and that's why they've been harder. Next slide. So managing speed, I've mentioned that a bunch of times. This is a really helpful, basic. It's exciting. I met the guy who did this. I've always seen that name, the researcher who found this, and this graph is used everywhere. So it's very exciting. Just yesterday. So you see, when this is someone walking, average person. What do you say, average? But this is more severe, let me say, for a child or an elderly frail person. So this is an average able-bodied, let's say, person. If I'm hit by a car moving at 20 miles per hour, I'll have on average an 8% chance of death. At only 40 miles, think how many streets, how many of your roads and every city's roads are 40 miles, right? They're probably signed maybe for 35. Folks are going 40, 45. If I'm hit on that street, my odds of dying are significant. This is pure physics, right? This is pure physics. If we know this, does it make our decision making different? I'll just say that's a decision you all, communities can make. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying there aren't policies and issues that need to change, but this is a public health issue in my mind. It's a physics question, and then it's a values question of if we know this is true, what will we do with the information? Next slide. I won't go into all this, but basically, in addition to that, sorry, that graphic, go back if you would. This was done years ago. Sorry, I'm really making you work there. This was done in 2011. Guess what's gotten a lot bigger and heavier since then? And you can see a lot of data about this. 75-80% of cars bought today, new private vehicle, regular folks, passenger vehicles, are SUVs or light trucks or heavy trucks. These numbers are very, very conservative. It's way worse than this. Next slide. I just forgot to say that. Also this is again physics, at that higher speed, it's just harder for somebody to stop. It takes longer and their field of vision. Again, this is like the science side I never knew. So this isn't just a gut feeling of like, oh, it seems scarier when someone's going 45 miles per hour. Next slide. And I really appreciate, again, I'm going to pull out the USDOT. They put out a new report, really good report. I never praised the USDOT so much, but really good report last year. This is important, I think. Focusing on speeding alone minimizes the impacts on traffic safety. It ignores the impact that even high legal speeds can have on safety, since human injury tolerance, again, back to that slide, can be exceeded even when drivers comply with the speed limit. Here's where the rub comes, you guys. We could spend forever trying to go out and get those speeders, those individuals who might always speed, let's be honest, or maybe we convince them not to. Some of them we convince not to, some will just keep doing it. Again, that's the point of, will people sometimes make mistakes? Some people will. And are cars getting bigger? Yes, they are. We know these things, right? And we know the math. What we can control is the physical environment. We can control the speed limits. Within that range, that piece is the part we need to focus on the most. Again, not to say we don't want to educate and enforce, we do, but we want to look upstream and think, what can we do where even within the legality, it's the safest thing possible. Next slide. So, okay, I think I already included this. Next slide. So really obsessed on speed. So I'm just going to stop it with her on the speed, but we'll come back to it. And then equity, really quickly touching. This is getting so much, thank goodness, so much more attention from all of us, as it should. But across, just like people, not just like, but as people walking and biking are more likely to be hit and killed, or to be killed when they're hit. We also know some populations in the U.S. are far more at risk. Why is that? It's mostly because we've over a generation or generations in the century, we've built neighborhoods a certain way, right? The freeways touch down in certain areas, the arterials run through certain areas, policies such as redlining and highway expansions, before our time exist, and they are influencing the streets today. They're influencing people's safety on the streets. So I really appreciate USDOT's also putting more attention here. Next slide. And one thing that I know you guys have done, actually, I think it's right over there, your crashes and equity plan or map over there. I'm pulling up Tampa's. We work with about 50 different cities. Every single city, whether it's Macon, Georgia, or Chicago, Illinois, every city, when they do this exercise, which you guys have done, I don't know it well, but when you overlay your high traffic injuries and deaths, when you overlay that map with an equity map, how you define it, I know your communities of concern, racial, demographic, et cetera, income equity, when you overlap, there is a disproportionate problem in our communities of concern around traffic safety and many other issues, I know. But again, because of these historic factors and policies that they live on. So really thinking about in your work, how are you thinking not just where are the traffic safety problems, but also where are the equity priorities? Next slide. And I realize I'm going way too long, aren't I? Move it along. Final ones. And this is hopefully a little precursor for the discussion. Hopefully it all is a precursor for the discussion, which is the fun part. But to think about what you can do more quickly. So when I mentioned Hoboken or talked about Hoboken being at 7 years of zero traffic deaths and that they scaled quickly, it's partly because they did not go out and build, like gold plated. And I know nobody does gold plated anymore. That's kind of a fun phrase. But, this idea of like building out one corridor perfectly and really with all the bells and whistles. That is great when you can do it. It's great. It takes a long time, but it's great. Instead, these are from different places, these photos, but what Hoboken did and what other cities are doing is they're identifying all the places with problems and doing quicker, what we call quick builds, literally quick builds. Sometimes they're pilots, like let's try it and see, or sometimes it goes in and it's meant to be permanent, but it can be done with paint and posts. Next slide. This is a great one in Lexington, Kentucky, and a shout out to Smart Growth America. I know some of you guys have worked with them, Complete Streets Coalition. They have a program, and it might be cool for you guys to look into, where they team up with communities and help do some of these quick builds. But I won't go into this too much, but you can see kind of a before picture. Lexington, it was a big, wide street, a lot of people speeding. The width of the street matters, right? People just kind of use it like a freeway. And then you can see they did some small things on the side, not a huge change, but they narrowed the lanes with paint and posts. They actually added that big median in the middle. They basically took up space with other things. Maybe you get more creative. Maybe it's like a cool, landscaped area. Maybe it's benches. Maybe it's bike parking. There's so much more you could do, right? But to think about how do you think differently about that space? Just because it looks like that today, just because Lexington had this street built, 150 whatever years ago, 20 years ago, it doesn't need to look like that. It can change. Next slide. In South Bend, Indiana. I think this is actually how people got Secretary Pete to be in on this safety thing, is that South Bend got one of these Smart Growth America pilot opportunities, and he was mayor then, and they did this awesome design. So again, it was a really big street. You can kind of imagine all the paint and stuff gone. and people were just zooming through driving, and it was really hard for pedestrians, et cetera. So they did paint and posts and plants. So cool. Next slide. Okay, fourth one and last one of the promising or the things that really need to change. This one's not as colorful and fun, but this is where the hard part comes, right? There's measures like lower speed limits and redesign your streets for lower speeds and do it faster and do it systemically. Those are all tools you guys have in your tool belt. They're all literally strategies that exist, are approved by the feds, and could be doing tomorrow. And I think I'm hearing about cool things you're doing already done on West Franklin, and you're doing these things, but how do you scale it? The harder part is here. How do you really institutionalize change? How do you change some of the more, let's say, underlying systems, foundational systems? So this is just an example. This is from Miami-Dade County. Miami-Dade County has a Vision Zero plan, and this is one of like 20 things they put in. And I love this because their Vision Zero plan, and I would encourage this, their Vision Zero plan isn't just a set of projects and a set of strategies. It does have those, and it does have these cool maps, their maps and things, but it also talks about what are the policy issues that undergird a lot of this that might need attention. So here's one example. In their county, they have the default speed limit at 30. And they're saying we should change the default speed limit to 20 to 25. So, and then they talk about why. Obviously, they give a lot of that physics and stuff. Why, right? So it's not just a small like, hey, let's fix this one intersection, or hey, let's use this one tool. I mean, it's a tool, but it's let's do this citywide because the science shows us this will be safer. Next slide. Way too much to read, but this one, I think it's Jersey City. Yeah, really important. This is here more as an example than to read it all, but really important to really have a plan. It can't just be a commitment. Back to that, Vision Zero isn't just a goal. It is a goal until you actually have an actionable plan with people's names or agency names by them, and a timeline and where you're at, and you're doing checkups, right? I mean, this is the accountability, right? And there's as many more pages, but really, well, I want to highlight this one actually now that I'm looking at it. But I know you guys have a goal. I saw it in some of your plans of encouraging more transit, walking and biking. Transit is free here. That is so awesome. I found that out the best way possible. But thinking about, okay, you guys are doing these things, thinking about, okay, if we don't own all the roads, which obviously you do not, right? Nobody does. But I know in North Carolina, it's much more state proportion, state-owned roads. What is our process for working with the state, not just to address those problem spots, or not just to do it when there's a repaving project, but to go in systematically and do more quickly. So again, that's got to be part of your plan. It's got to be part of your policy change. Next slide. I wanted to give some love to Burlington Graham Metro Planning Organization, who I met recently, and they have a really good plan. I mean, obviously very, different environment, obviously much smaller, more rural, et cetera. But you'll really see that, up at the top, they're reevaluating their speed limits citywide. So not just saying, okay, where do we have crashes and let's change that? They're literally saying, do we set speed limits the way we want to set speed limits for safety? If not, how do we change that? Ditto on the bottom. How are we using low cost measures? That's kind of that pilot or quick build thing I mentioned across the board, at different intersections. Again, not just wait till someone dies, like on Polk Street, where I mentioned my San Francisco experience, not just let's wait till someone dies and we go fix it, right? I mean, that is honestly how we've been doing it. How are we getting ahead of that? Next slide. And yeah, on the state road thing. So everybody I talk with in every single community or state says, yes, we have a big problem, to be honest, on our county or state roads. So if I'm talking to a city or a town, and not surprisingly, right, it's often your state or county owned roads that were built earlier, maybe before certain land use came around, right? And they were meant to carry lots of cars. They are your arterials usually, maybe not all, but bigger streets carrying a lot of the car load, right? And I think your percentage here, yeah. So your state-owned roads, am I understanding right, are 80% of the traffic deaths, 70% of the injuries. Again, you have more state-owned roads, as I understand, in North Carolina than many states. But you're not going to move the needle until some of this thinking of how do we not just do what I call, and again, this is not meant to be negative, but we've been doing the whack-a-mole, right? Where do we have a problem and let's go fix it. We still need to fix the known problems. But if we're ever going to get ahead of it, we need to look at it systemically like New York City did and say where those left turns are, et cetera, we know we need to go out and do these things more systemically. Next slide. Now, I'll just say kudos to you guys. I won't spend time because you know this better than I do, but you already have a Vision Zero commitment. You have a great pedestrian safety plan. Next slide. You have this really impressive community strategy that I'm super interested in, and kudos. And you have things like your maps of equity and crashes. So you have obviously, and you've got everybody in this room, you've got the basis for the change. Next slide. Yeah, I'm leaving it at that, of turning back to you guys of discussion of what are the ways that you can make more of those systemic and policy changes, and how do you move the needle in ways that really align with that goal of zero traffic deaths and really complete communities and complete streets. So I'll open it up questions and kind of pose those questions to you guys, but maybe to start with questions. Disagreements, examples of, should we go to the next slide? My contact information too.
I have a question. Sorry.
Oh yeah, please. Sorry. Yes.
Can you talk about what some of the biggest barriers have been for communities like Hoboken to make those changes and how they overcame them?
Yeah, I have heard for them, it was the time it took to do projects, like everybody, again, not special. They're like, oh, we have a problem on this street, and 5 other streets say, we're going to do planning and community outreach, and then we're going to plan some more, and then we're going to go find money. And it was taking years to address these projects, right? And like everywhere, right? So with those quick builds, if they know they have problems, and they know with these quick builds, and again, this can be posts, paint, things that are removable. They are not permanent. They're not expensive. They would go out and test these ideas and see, do these work well? But they could do them like this. And they did. So I will say, it was important. I want to give credit to their mayor. The mayor said, and they got pushback. Some of it meant removing parking spaces. I mentioned daylighting. They got pushback. And I don't want to make it all sound easy. When you remove parking spaces, what are you going to get? People who are really upset. And you're going to get that. So again, it's a choice. It's going to be a choice to make. When you lower speed limits and narrow lanes, and it takes an extra 30 seconds or minute and a half for someone to drive across town, you're going to get complaints about that. So I think what's kind of interesting about the Vision Zero concept, one of the things very, very interesting is I think it enables policymakers, decision makers, instead of having to kind of try and mediate those battles between, some neighbors want traffic calming and they want it to be safer and they want their kids to be able to bike to school and they're going to, fight for that. We want a speed hump and we want to slow the street down. And then you've got other neighbors who say, like, no, please don't change that. I really don't want my street changed, and they'll fight against it. That happens everywhere, right? To me, for a community that's truly committing to Vision Zero, you go out and you say, okay, we as a community have a decision to make. Do we prioritize the speed and convenience? Do we prioritize the safety? And to be honest about the trade-off, it is going to take another 30 seconds. You are going to have to slow down. We do think this will be safer. Here's why we think it's safer, because the math, there are a lot of reasons why. It does not always win them over, but to the rest of the general public, it's a pretty strong argument. And I think it's not the way we've been talking generally. Again, not to say safety is new to traffic transportation, it's not. But it really hasn't been, it's not been the leading paradigm. Or the leading priority. It truly, it's one of many, many things. We've cared a lot about congestion, and we still do, right? You want to minimize congestion and you want to increase efficiency. That is truly what planners and engineers are largely trained to do really well, because that's honestly, it's how funding is given from the feds traditionally. They really are funded around capacity and moving a lot of cars. And what we're starting to see is we want to do differently. I don't want to pretend like it's all, overnight, obviously, but there is this shift happening slowly, but it is happening. Great question. Yeah.
First, an announcement. You mentioned zero waste. The library does have a zero waste policy. And you put some messaging up there, but your forks can go in the chair below, and basically everything else is compostable. Okay, plates, your skewers, your napkins, your food. My second question is, can you talk about, and answering this selfishly in my role as the communications director, what role in places that have been successful does like a communications campaign in addition to all of the strategies and tactics, what have places done that have really done this well done in?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people really focus on that speed message. I think a lot of the public does not understand that. I mean, to one driving, to me driving, going 30 versus 40 really doesn't feel that different, right? You're in the car, it doesn't feel different at all. But what a difference that is. So I think there's that. I've seen more communities focus on the speed part of it. And the other thing I would say around education and communications is, I think starting with the folks, honestly, who are helping make decisions and community leaders who are kind of communicating the changes. Like, are we going to go out and change every single person's mind to slow down and be very good and safe? Let's keep trying, but I'm not going to hold my breath on being 100% with that. So being kind of more focused on certain segments, right? Certain segments of folks that, are either more likely, we know it's very clear, young men from the ages of like 16 to you guys early 20s, like not a huge surprise, right? And younger people in general, right? So how is there more focus on that versus, your average billboard? You're like, okay, it's a nice billboard. Is it changing the world? No, but putting that money towards more focused engagement.
Thank you. Yeah, please. Thank you. I had a question about the funding that you brought up.
Yeah.
Because I light up, as you mentioned, all the funding that could be available. As someone in the middle of our budget session and struggling with the fact that we are talented, we do not struggle to get grants, but there's often local matches required, and we struggle for a budget to always support that. So I'm just wondering how the funding that you're seeing coming available, are there substantial local matches that are required for that funding?
Yeah, the Safe Streets and Roads for All I mentioned requires a 20% match, which can be staff time. So if you have staff members that are working on this project, it can be all staff time. I mean, you've got to show they're going to be putting this amount of time and energy towards it. That counts. Yeah. You also, I mean, if your MPO or state or somebody wanted to partner with you, maybe it's a state road you're working on or a couple state roads, other entities it can't be federal money, that match, but it could be state money. It could be other funding that maybe you could find, but I would say staff time. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Well, thanks for all your presentation there, Leah. I think where I'd like to go is first to say we have an amazing team here, and we're doing a lot of the things you've mentioned. We're doing the pilots. We're putting out quick builds. We've changed the speed limit town-wide. We're focused on town streets. We work with our partner with the state on our state roads. I think where we need to go is that systemic approach. I couldn't agree more that we know what to do, but where we are right now is we're chasing what residents ask us to do, and we're chasing the crash reports. Crash report comes in at one intersection. We focus on that intersection, even though staff knows that's going on in a lot of other places. So I guess my question, it's more of a speech, but my question is, how do other communities that have had success get to that point? And I probably should have been much closer to the door before I made this point, but I also think we need more local resources, not just for the local match. We're talking about basic infrastructure here. We're talking about sidewalks on major streets that aren't there. We're talking about crosswalks, curb ramps. I don't know why the federal government should be paying for that, to be honest with you. Again, I should probably race for the door. But it's basic city building to me. So,
Why would they not?
Yeah.
Or why would
they're going to? I really haven't seen the big dollars. It's not like a big interchange that DOT is going to build. I mean, this is worth small money the feds are putting out when you divide it by the communities that are getting it. We're working with the MPO on the planning grant, but we can't really get the rest of the Safe Streets money until that planning grant's done. So we're waiting, but people are not dying, So that's my speech. There was a question in there somewhere, right?
I mean, you guys have I know, I feel like I saw eyes light up around more of that systemic approach, right? Like you're doing good things. How do you do your West Franklin projects in 20 different places? And I'm saying that one just because I know it's a good one. The things work. Is it a certain intersection? Is it a this or that? How do you do that more broadly, more quickly? Y'all tell me, what would that look like? I mean, I guess I'll put it out there is that possible? let's assume it's possible. I'm going to say it's possible because people are doing it. They're doing it in Hoboken. What would need to change to enable that more systemic approach to change on the ground? Everybody, I'll put you guys on the spot.
Well, I think you mentioned that North Carolina has a lot more state maintained roads. And even though we have good working relationships with our Department of Transportation, I was thinking when I was looking at the Hoboken example and the fact that they were able to lower the speed limits everywhere, I'm wondering how many state roads does that include? Because I think that's a tough conversation, because even though the federal secretary may be saying that they want to prioritize safety over moving traffic, as a state, DOT usually is focusing on moving traffic. And so those conversations get tough as you go to talk about these projects and how we want to propose changes to roads. And it's a major thoroughfare, and their goal is to move traffic. There's different priorities. So I think that may not have trickled down to the state levels. But I think if and when that happens, it could change the dynamic there. But right now, I think it is definitely a struggle for those tougher conversations.
Yeah. This is kind of a little bit of a rub for okay, the street was designed and been functioning a certain way for a long, long time, but now it's got a lot of different uses, right? You guys mentioned MLK Boulevard as maybe an example of that, and others.
Those are both state-owned roads as well.
Yeah.
So we should be clear about that. And we had our own death or not death, but own tragedy New Year's Eve. So we have these issues that we're dealing with. And I disagree with colleague in the room that the federal government should not pay for sidewalks. Local governments are pretty strapped right now. And if we want Vision Zero to be a reality, and the federal government is saying it's important, then I think the federal government should contribute to the sidewalks. It is clear, and it's not a cheap, inexpensive application to put in. So that's why I disagree. If we're going to get there, we're going to need some assistance.
Yeah, I'll say now is a great time to ask for that assistance because there is more money than has ever been on the table. The states are getting a lot more money than they have in the past, and the feds are directly, and I should say that SS Spray program, it's money that comes directly to the town. It's only for towns, counties, cities, tribes. It's only going there, which is a very different model. You had a question?
So I really appreciated the comment that you made earlier about your early part of the journey and realizing that you needed to expand beyond the bike safety piece. I'm missing 70% of my vision. And my observation a lot of times is that they're having conversations and we're talking about bike lanes and this and that and the other thing. But a lot of times I'm like, how am I going to get across that? Or I see places where they conflict, the needs conflict. So I'm curious to hear more about how far the ADA goes, if we need more, and who's doing it well.
Great question. I think there's been a good evolution of we need more space. To be honest, there's been little crumbs there saying, oh, let's squeeze sidewalks and bikeways and benches and lighting. How do we grow that piece of literally, grow that section, that pie? And to say, do we really need 6 lanes on the road? Can we widen out the sidewalks? Can we have a separated bike path so that bikes and people are crossing separately? So I feel like design-wise, there's more in the toolkit. Things like protected intersections, which helps keep the bikes on the street, not go up on the sidewalk if they're feeling dangerous. So I think there's more of that. But big picture, some of the systemic stuff we could do, like, hey, let's lower speed limits so everybody. Part of the reason sometimes people are biking, say on a sidewalk or crazy, is because they don't feel safe on the street. Right? Not everybody, but some. How do we keep them on the street or the bike lane where they belong, not coming up on a sidewalk? Build that space out. But it's a long ways to go, I know. Maria.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts pinging around in my head, so I'm going to try and be coherent. But I think we are on the path to this. I think we have, like you said, we have the staff in place. I think we have the political will, at least on the board. I think when we do best is usually like the way I think is I need a big picture vision to like attach things into and explain to people. And that's something like as a trained policy analyst, it's easy for me to understand the policy, but then turning it into like, why do you have to be annoyed that Estes is closed for 2 years, right? Like that's right. Like but there's a point to it, right? The reason that you have to be frustrated about Estes is because we're making it safer. And I don't know that I think we kind of tell that story later when people are annoyed, instead of saying like, hey, guess what? You might be a little annoyed, get ready. But here's why, because we think that people's lives are more important than you being able to cut through Estes every single day of your life. Like we think that's really important. And so we're going to kindly remind you each time you get mad, like, we know, like I live off Estes. I am in it with you. But that's why that's what this is about. And that's what our complete community vision is about, is having something to hook into all the time. That you're not being targeted or you're not being treated unfairly. You're part of the vision and the values of this community. And that's where I think we do our best work, is when we think about it in advance. Because I think like sometimes our Bergen's team is excellent. Like they're ahead of me every time. But for everybody to be able to articulate, like, we're going to do this, it's coming, be ready. And here's why. And it's not because, like, then we start getting into like, oh, it's because the utilities were screwed up and now we have to, right? And then we're already in this defensive position of like, oh, I'm so sorry, we're making it hard for you. Like, I've been on the phone with one lady who I gave to Chris finally, and now it's okay. And she's delightful. She's told me that she'll buy me a bottle of wine if Estes opens on time, and I said I'll drink it with you if Estes opens on time. But like we are, well, right? Maybe I'll give it to Chris. I don't know. We'll see. But I really think when we get really clear on how it fits into the bigger system and vision and goals and who we are as a community, it's so much easier for me as an elected who is not an expert to explain that to people, or even to understand what we're doing in the moment. Like when we got West Franklin and I was like, I don't know, what are we trying to do? Is it okay to take away parking spaces here? Like, I don't know. And when you give me the big picture, I'm like, oh, right. Yeah. Like, I get it. And so I think just being able to continue to work at that systems level and like have the school system here and have those like official partnerships where we're like doing it together and we all are on the same page is so much easier for messaging and for me to talk to people who are mad. Honestly.
There's always going to be those people who are mad. Let's be honest. Yeah,
it's super frustrating and they don't know why we're doing it. Like they don't know that we're trying to like, they're like, a girl is changed forever. Like she is nonverbal. She is not walking to this day. And her mom is a teacher at the school across the street where she was hit. And everybody went out and marched on the street and like had a march for it. So they know that like they can make that connection. It's just we have to keep being like, no, we have to be safe. We have to be safe. And if it means that we can't drive Estes, then we're not driving Estes for 2 years. Like, but that's, I think, where we need to bring these conversations for the public.
Really great.
Yeah, to me, the thing that I'm taking away from this conversation that draws me back to Susan's point and what the mayor is articulating and what you said in your presentation was that we have to be extremely clear about trade-offs up front, and that we cannot accomplish this by imposing it, because we will lose the political will to implement it. People will not put up with the frustration, and it's a really useful lesson for me to think about. We have to articulate those trade-offs. We have to be right about what the trade-offs are when we have that conversation. And then we have to go forward, even if there are people who say, you know, as long as we figure out what the balance is on what the trade is that more people are willing to make, then we have to make the trade and be uncomfortable about the fact that some people didn't want that trade. But I really take your point about needing to articulate those trade-offs. And I think that's a point that resonates across basically every decision that we make as a board. Like, I think we've seen that bite us in the rear several times. So I appreciate that.
Appreciate you saying that. And I think it's probably acknowledging like the way things work now, Many things work really well on our streets. Many things do not. And they didn't work well, not because anyone in this room, you know what I mean, or even your predecessors, like decades and decades ago, you know, things are built a certain way. God, I'd really do that differently, right? If you like, you could create Chapel Hill today or create the whole region, you know, maybe you would do things a little differently, right? So you can't go back in time, but you can put the vision out there of this can be different. I think one of the things I think is most challenging is that the time it takes to make these changes, even if there is not full agreement, but lots of agreement, there's going to be some disagreement too, but lots of agreement if we should do this change, make it safer. The time from idea to plan to community engagement to getting on the ground, you know, half the people move or they're not interested anymore or they're mad because it's not perfect. But I'll say I'm really taken with this idea of the quick builds, the pilots. It's not necessarily the end all forever, but can you get more on the ground and can you try more things and have more visibility? It's not just getting it on the, it's actually the best community engagement or feedback you're going to have is people seeing it and being like, I love it, or I hate it, or why didn't you put it on this side, or it should be bigger, or that's community engagement. Again, maybe they want to go to City Hall for a meeting. Maybe they want to actually just walk out and say, here's what I think, you know, and I want to give you the feedback on this, because when this street is narrowed a little bit, yes, I have to slow down a little bit and it's really annoying. Then a bunch of other people say, I feel safe letting my child cross the street to go to that park now because this design is different. We did it with paint and we did it with posts. We did it in 3 months instead of 3 years. And we did 30 of them instead of 1 in 3 years. Like it really is about scale. And yeah, just thinking about like it can look good too, like the art, you know, this is interesting. That South Bend example I shared, I guess they found some local artists and they worked with local artists and made it kind of a fun, like the community members went out there and helped paint the road, like really engaging. So I just love the community aspect of it too. I mean, what else do y'all think in terms of what change would be most helpful if you were able to do the things you want to do maybe faster or more holistically, more quickly, more spread? What else would need to change and how would it change? And maybe let me ask this in a different way, not to put him on the spot, like are things set up right now for that? And by that, I mean, not, again, putting him on the spot, but I will say some of those slides I show kind of like a little bit of I know you have a Vision Zero commitment. I will say I didn't see the depth that some of the communities have from what I saw of, okay, here's the action and this is near term. We're going to do this in 0 to 2 years. This one's midterm. We're going to do 2 to 5. This one's really big. You know, this is about changing, I don't know, getting speed cameras in, and we got to work with the state on legislation for that. That's going to take this many years. But it's in our plan and someone's starting to work on it. And our intergovernmental, governmental people are putting this on the policy agenda for 3 years from now or tomorrow. Having that priority and that level of ownership and timelines of policy, I think that is needed in a community. It's not just the like, how do we do things? Kind of, I'm talking more tactically, but also more strategically. Mayor, to your point of kind of, you know, selling the ideas too. It's also showing people like, hey, we know these are problems. We're working on them. That is going to take 3 years or so. But in the meantime, we're doing these, you know, quick builds, or we're doing things more quickly. But let me tell you about this bigger change we're doing that's going to take some time. I guess I, would ask, like, is there appetite for that?
So, listening to the discussion, there's a disconnect a little bit because, and I'm at Public Works and we do a lot of projects.
Yeah.
And the projects are based on studies. So we do the bike ped, like pedestrian study. We do connectivity. You know, we do all these studies, and folks go out from planning to Public Works and have meetings with the community and talk about safety and bike lanes and sidewalks, and we get all this feedback, and then we implement that in projects, and it's based on what the community's feedback is, and it takes time. You know, you got to design them, you got to fund them. There seems to be we have to do a better job of reminding people this is what you asked for, and do a better job of, as Susan talked about, communicating, so that when the projects do come online and they start, you know, it took you 2 or 3 years to get there, and it's like Estes. I mean, we worked on that one. That was designed for years. Homestead Road, the one we're doing now, which is a huge project. Elliott Road Extension, phase 1 of Elliott. You know, we have all these projects, and it's trying to get there, and the community funded them, but then there's a disconnect because, you know, they're just not going to happen overnight. And so, and those are the big projects, and that's not the small things we can do, but we just got to do a better job of reminding people this is what town was asked and talked about, and putting bike lanes in. We're doing all these safety things, and it just gets lost, I think, with the frustration sometimes.
You feel like there's more public hunger or interest generally, not everybody, but to have more of the safety improvements down?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about them, and then we go implement them, and then I think there's a lag between the time that they come online, and I think that's when people forget, and we just got to do a better job of reminding them that we had these studies, we had these discussions. I mean, there's a lot of work that went into those plans, and then, you know, staff goes and looks at them and says, oh, okay, we're supposed to do bike lanes, we're supposed to do sidewalks, we're supposed to do these things, and then we move forward trying to implement it. So it really comes from the public, and, you know, what we put in place to try to make things safe. So I don't know, like I said, it takes years. You know, Elliott Road Extension, we started designing that in 11. Okay, and it took we just finished it recently. So, you know, it's just, I think we just got to do a better job of that communication. I think what Susan was talking about.
Do you feel like we're asking the right questions?
Yeah, I mean, when we do those studies and have the.
I mean, not that they're accurate, right? But like, if we want to do pilot projects and we want to do tactical urbanism and we want to do the smaller, I mean, yeah, Elliott is going to take forever, right? Just because it's so big. But like, if we wanted to do some pilot projects or some smaller things that, you know, are not permanent, does it make sense that we're going out and asking the public, like, what do you think about this? As opposed to like, what do you think about this? And like, we want to do this thing across town and we want to think about things differently. And then we get buy-in there. And then you have people hooked in so that they can't say, oh, but like, I don't want it in front of my house. Like, oh my God, I didn't know you meant here. Right? Like, we got to get the buy-in on the big picture and then say, like, we want to do 30 projects around town. Isn't this cool? And like, you might be the lucky one that could have it in front of your house. But like, we let people kind of sink it by being like, hey, Karen, are you okay with this in this one little place? And they're like, no.
From staff experience, once you do it one place, people want them all over. And, you know, I don't want to speak for everybody else. They might know better than I do. But when we do some of these, you know, the speed tables with the metals cut out, working with our fire department, they want them other neighborhoods, you know. And so then, you know, you know, you just gotta balance that.
And I think you're right that when we're talking to the community, it does need to be much more high level as to what they're buying into and what they'll be seeing. But I also think it does go back to the communication because folks don't understand what it means to retrofit an area to put in infrastructure. And it's not going to just be that we're going to lay pavement to give you a greenway or lay pavement to give you a bike lane off the street. Likely, while we're doing that, we're going to lay utilities and we're going to upgrade, you know, some type of fixture or some kind of pipe that's old. And since you're opening it, they want to open it, and the projects grow in a way that the public don't really understand. And then what does that look like to them on the ground? So I do think there's some communication of what you'll see as we start projects. So I think all of that should be a part of the conversation.
And I love your presentation, your focus on systems and doing that, and kind of in talking to what you guys were just talking about, how you sell the big idea and then you don't go out for all the little implementation pieces. So are there any communities that have like those quick builds? Do they have a toolkit? And you say, look, we're going to come up with 5 things that will address some big issues. Here are the 5 things. Isn't this great? We have buy-in. We're going, oh, you're getting one. Well, no, you bought it before. So. But
You
I
already
think-
bought it.
Yeah, too late. But I think that might be really useful. So then you've got a palette of things you can try in different places.
And you can see, okay, they did this in South Bend, they did this in Charlotte, they tried it, here's what they reduced speeds by this and traffic deaths or injuries by this. And yes, there's more of that now, and I'm happy to share some of those groups who've done that. There's a lot more out there, and it's cool that, again, now the federal government, I know they're, that's still way up there, but they're endorsing these things. They're actually saying with that SS Ray money, do these quick builds. The word quick build and pilots is in the grant. They don't tell you what to do or where, of course, but yes, there's now some really good guides out there. So I'll share those. Yes.
And we're actually doing that now. Our toolkit is actually a tool shed. I mean, we've got a lot of material. It's probably the only good thing that came out of COVID is we got a bunch of material that's all plastic, it's flexible, and we're putting it out on the street. Where I'm thinking is we're spending a lot of time responding to residents who want traffic calming in their neighborhood because there's a perceived risk. There hasn't been a crash as long as we've been keeping crash data, but they want us to work in that. And that's what Lance was talking about, where we put it into one neighborhood and everybody gets to see it and they want it in their neighborhood. And so we're spending an amazing amount of time putting these things on the street. It's months. And this is in addition to what Lance said earlier, where he's talking about the big projects that take years. But the neighborhood stuff, we're doing it in months. And it's not a big laborious thing. I mean, we're maintaining it. Those things get hit, they get knocked out. We have to put them back in. But I just wonder if we're spending our time in the right way. It's a perceived risk. We're responding to residents who want something. We're delivering town service. But the people who are dying are on the bigger streets and people are getting seriously injured. We work together on Mount Carmel Church and Culver. We're getting hurt there. So I question if we're spending our time in the right place, and those resources are already bought. We're not going out buying a lot of those things. So that makes it easier to deploy.
Is it prioritized the way you were talking about? Like it's based on the actual risk, not the perceived risk? Or is it
We're
kind of,
just being responsive to
is it
residents.
customer driven?
It's customer driven. Perfect way to put it.
We have, it'll, I think, be coming to council this spring. I might be overpromising. A new traffic calming policy that the intention is for it to be completely data-based.
Yeah.
We've still been kind of strong-armed in some cases into installing stuff in areas that we know that there's not a problem, just because that's the way it is sometimes, right? But we are aiming to go in a much more data-driven.
So I am curious, since we do have some folks from NCDOT in the room, not to put you on the spot, Chuck. But we've had a history of working really well together and trying to find ways to implement state's complete communities or complete streets vision. And yet, because most of our major roads are DOT controlled and there are higher speed roads, I mean, I used to bike up and down MLK and really wish we could have a bike lane there, for example. I'm just curious what your thoughts are after hearing this, and if you're seeing change, and are there going to be other opportunities to think a little differently about some of those roads and make some of these changes?
I appreciate that. And so, yes, for the last almost 36 years, I've been coordinating closely with the town of Chapel Hill, and I think we've got success stories out there. I'll say that the department does have a Vision Zero policy, and we work closely with all of the other stakeholders who have signed on to that. We also have a complete streets policy where we need to think about implementing multimodal in all of our projects. And, where that makes sense to do it. I mean, a rural road in northern Orange County, you're not going to have a lot of pedestrian demand, but you certainly have it on the West Franklin. You have all modes on West Franklin, for example. So I think we're doing that. I've heard, a lot of the conversation about how you deliver those projects. And a lot of that is just in context of what the project is. I mean, a very large project is simply, by default going to take a long time. But then there's low-hanging fruit, the easy things that can be done. Case in point, I was waiting for Bergen to toot our horn on this, but we've got success stories in here where we've leveraged essentially a maintenance program for resurfacing our roads. where we're paving and we're putting new pavement markings in anyway. So let's think about how we put different pavement markings in there at road dot, where that makes sense to do. So you leverage the money that you were going to spend for a maintenance operation to actually do that, plus make some safety improvements and multimodal improvements. So we've done that, and we'll continue to do that, and had a lot of success on that. So I think DOT, I've heard a few comments in here that I bristled at a little bit, but I remained quiet. DOT has got a little bit of a marketing problem. We're still trying to overcome, what those SOBs from DOT, just to be blunt. Word about is moving cars 70 miles an hour past this town. Well, that's not true. Not anymore. So, we are, there's a bit of a battleship there, but it's current. And hopefully we're not going to hit the bridge pier like we did. But I don't think we will. So I in my career, I've seen a big change there, and I think you'll continue to see that. Not only within NCDOT, but essentially nationwide, as you've been telling us, right? I think there's certainly room for improvement there. And I think one of the things that has just popped in my head on where NCDOT can improve or can consider that is traffic calming. There is a general statute out there that allows that on state maintained subdivision roads only. But unfortunately, it puts all of the burden, economic and otherwise, on the residents. So that's kind of a non-starter. But that legislation is decades old. So I see that as an opportunity, an example of an opportunity where we can do that.
That's a great example. Yeah. I think some of this stuff, it's changed so much, right? The idea of this quick build, that just wasn't an idea on the table very much like 10 years ago. So it's a different, I don't want to say different tool, but it's a different way to use the tools, right? In a faster way. So maybe some ways catching up some of the existing policies or practices to make that more. I'll just throw this idea out there. I think you guys should apply for, and I think you would win some of that SS for A money to do some of the stuff that you already are doing, but maybe scaling, maybe doing it in some places you wouldn't normally be doing it easily, doing it quicker. It could be a really interesting model, just throw it out there of, you've got, the support and the interest and the need, but could you test out, because it's got to be a demonstration, what are you kind of testing? But could you test out some of the scaling pieces? And obviously you have to figure out what that means, what that looks like. Is it traffic calming, et cetera? But maybe there's a way to do, again, more than just a corridor, more than just an intersection, but say, we're going to do this in 10 locations or 2 full neighborhoods and see if it works and share it with everybody else. Sorry.
I haven't spoken yet. And I think, Leah, you asked what do we need to be able to realize some of these things? And I think from my perspective, and especially thinking about the SS4A grant that, it's not news to us, we are thinking about this already. That and when I think about it, I mean, to be quite honest, my mind just kind of goes blank, because I think where we need this quick build stuff is on DOT roads. And this is not by any means pointed at Chuck and Chad. I know we all have our things that we need to follow, but just I cannot, in my mind, figure out what we would do with that funding on these kinds of roads. I mean, what on earth can we do on MLK to stop people from dying that comes before BRT? That's a quick build project. I mean, I think DOT may or may not allow certain things. There's certain state statutes, there's no funding available for standalone bike and pedestrian projects, just things like that. And I just I can't get there in my mind. So maybe, we can work together on an application of things that are feasible. But also I think looking at, department heads, town managers, elected officials, and pardon me if I'm not allowed to ask these things of this group, but, as staff, we need help. We need support in these things that, Chuck and I have a history. We disagree sometimes. We each go to bat for our agencies, and there's only a certain level where we can get. That it takes people from higher up positions to sort of make those changes and advocate for legislative changes that would allow standalone bike ped funding, or allow DOT to let us paint in the road
in front of a school on a state-owned road, things like that. So there's my soapbox on what I would say needs to happen to make these changes.
And one example of what Bergen was just talking about, and I think Camille brought it up earlier, the location on MLK where 2 people have died on New Year's Eve. I think it was 2 successive years on New Year's Eve. Pedestrians getting hit. So we had a mini celebration where the state had said, yes, we got spot safety money to build a safe crosswalk. And we're like, yeah, that's great. And then the next day we found out it's going to take 2 years. So the idea we've talked about as staff is why can't the town advance the money to build it now and with promise that we get paid back in 2 years according to the state schedule for funding. So that would be one idea to put forward. But also wanted to mention, you mentioned Montgomery County. I was up there last weekend in Maryland, and it caught my eye because I'm a traffic engineer, but they've got speed enforcement by camera and red light running by camera. That we are allowed to do that in North Carolina, or at least in Chapel Hill.
Okay.
So, that's the ultimate. That's the Mac Daddy Grand Slam home run if we want to go there, of really making our streets safe. But obviously very politically fraught.
Yeah, definitely another tool, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Chuck, can I try and not put you on the spot, but ask a question?
Sure.
So first off, if there was something temporary, would DOT get mad?
No, and as a matter of fact, the area that Roger was alluding to, I think, is Critz. One of the things that we've done, and I'm not sure it's going to take 2 years. We'll look into that. But one of the things that we did out there was actually put in some temporary devices on what we were thinking, we being the town and NCDOT engineered planning staff, on what would work out there. And part of what we were doing there was to get some community input.
Yeah.
And yep, we got.
I bet you did. I bet you did. You're good on that. But let's say we got SSRA money.
Mm-hmm.
And the state didn't have to fund something.
Yeah.
What if we just did it?
But we wouldn't want you to just do.
I'm just poking hypotheticals.
No, but no.
Right. What if it was there and y'all didn't have to worry about it?
So let me see if I understand. So
I mean, I think you understand, but yeah.
I'm just
dark of night.
So
what if we put something out there that could be removed? It wasn't, it wasn't permanent. If somebody noticed it at DOT and came and complained, we could be like, it's gone, don't worry about it. But would it be okay to ask forgiveness instead of permission?
Wow. Well, let me.
That was from you.
I think DOT, we have been and are willing to continue to, let's come to the table, right? The community didn't give a hoot about whether it's a state maintained road, a town maintained road, or a private road. They're just on that road, right? So I think we continue to do what we've been doing. Let's collaborate together and come up with those solutions. DOT itself has done some of those temporary things, some of those trial things. We've had some monies to do that. I think one of the challenges it's funding. One of the challenges is funding and some of the things that go along with that funding, that requirement of funding, right? So again, going back to those success stories of where we introduced some road diets with some scheduled resurfacing, we had our resurfacing funding. That funding by statute has certain limitations on what could be done. And in those cases, the town was able to draw from a local resource, a local funding source, to bring that in and fill that gap, and the project was successful. So I think where those opportunities exist, we need to do that. But no, if the town has got some idea of what you want to do on a state maintained road, continue to call, right? I mean, that's what we've been doing.
By the way, we did that on West Franklin at Roberson. We didn't tell you about it.
Well, now
But
it
it
all
could
comes
come out
out.
tonight,
It all
yeah.
comes out. So my other question for you is, if you could have, if there was state rules that you could get changed, that you think are reasonable, like what should we be advocating for with our state representatives? Like, are there things that you feel like are politically feasible in 2024 or 2025 in the state legislature that we should be pushing for?
I think some different take on traffic calming. Our current traffic calming statute would probably be one. I think, again, it goes back to funding. I think funded, Bergen mentioned, more funding for the other modes of transportation. I think you're probably alluding to caps in the STIP and those types of things. Where you're putting your money. Roger talked about the spot safety program, excellent program to address isolated safety issues such as an intersection improvement, a pedestrian crosswalk improvement at Critz Drive. But the reality is the funding is limited. So you have to make very hard decisions on what you're going to fund. We've all heard it. Is DOT going to wait for someone to die at this intersection before they do anything? Well, that paints a terrible picture, but the reality is what funding source is available to do that and to deliver that? And if that funding source is very limited, which it is, again, you're making decisions about cost to benefit. And that has to deal with reducing the severity and number of crashes. And you have to have some severity right there. Going back to what Roger's point was, you're reacting to some community concerns about a perceived risk, whereas you may have other locations on your system where you've got real data that shows you've got crashes, but you're unable to focus on that. So to me, that's the biggest thing, is that the spot safety program, as an example, where you're doing those small projects that make big impacts at that one location. We need more funding there so we can deliver more of those types of projects and let the bigger projects take care of themselves, the I-40s of the world, take care of themselves through those very different programs.
I would just add that what I just said about the more funding for spot safety. Probably should also advocate for a higher cap. These spot safety projects, the cost is just increased exponentially, so it's hard to deliver one right now. The cap is.
I know we probably need to wind down. Let you guys go. But I'll just say, I know I've mentioned that funding opportunity a lot. I think in terms of having something to perhaps consider as a rallying point or an example, right? Example, like, could we do some things differently? Money in this case wouldn't be the problem, but get some money in to try some different approaches. It's tighten up, turn around that things need to be done in 2 years. It's not forever, but it's, something you can show and then just say, hey, people like it. We want to do more. I'll just put that out. Cause I know sometimes at the end of this discussion, God, there's so much that needs to change or the money or the policies, right? It all needs improvement. But I do think what we have now is greater political will, funding available. So don't let it be the problem on this, for some of these things, funding available, and they're wanting to see results on it. So they're wanting to say, hey, we tried something a little different than we used to do. Let us tell you how it works. Maybe it didn't work and you tell them. But I do think you have this opportunity when we say okay, so what are some of the things that need to change? Some of the things could start with some of these chances now. And I think really building on the enthusiasm you guys already have, the plans you already have, the leadership and commitment and experience you already have. You've got all the right ingredients to do it all. So thank you for letting me be a part of the discussion. Thank you all for your leadership.
Thank you all so much for being here. We appreciate the partnership. You know the commitment that we have to this philosophy, this paradigm, and looking forward to continued partnership. And Leah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everybody.
Sure.